The city was already waking up, but the morning sounds of Boston still seemed muffled in the cozy rental apartment. Through the semi-transparent curtains, the sun filtered in soft beams, painting the walls with a golden hue. I stood by the window, looking at my reflection in the glass. The new suit fit perfectly, sharp yet understatedly elegant. It seemed to symbolize the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I was nervous. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened the buttons on the blazer. This wasn't just the first day at work. This was the day that would determine whether my long-awaited dream of working at an architectural firm was real or just a distant fantasy. "Coffee's ready," Michael's voice called from the kitchen. His usual upbeat tone was, as always, encouraging. I turned around. Michael was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, his smile soft, a little teasing, as if saying, "Why are you so worked up?" "I can't believe this is happening," I confessed, turning my gaze away. "New city, new job. It all feels so big." "And that's great," he interrupted. "You know you've got this. Even if you faint from nervousness, I'll be right here to catch you." I smiled, despite the tension. "Thanks for the support, Mr. Always Confident." "That's me," he winked, handing me a cup. "You just need to remember who you are. You're an amazing architect about to take Boston by storm." "We'll see," I whispered, taking a sip of the scalding coffee. In that moment, his belief in me became the anchor that kept me afloat. I didn't want to show how terrified I was of failing. Inside, there was a bubbling mixture of uncertainty and anticipation. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. The marble floor of the lobby gleamed under the morning light streaming through the glass doors. I stood at the reception desk, trying to steady my breath and hide the tremble in my hands. People in business suits moved quickly around me, some answering calls, others hurriedly flipping through folders. The architectural firm Fraser and Partners was even more impressive than I had imagined. "You must be Sophie." A voice, both confident and warm, pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned around. Standing before me was a woman in her 30s with short chestnut hair. Her left arm was adorned with a tattoo of a branch with fine lines, looking as though they had been drawn with ink on her wrist. "Leah, the personnel coordinator, let me show you around," she said, smiling, though there was something probing in her eyes. I followed her down a long corridor, past glass walls where work was buzzing. Designers were animatedly discussing projects, assistants were running with documents. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and fresh paper. "Do you like it?" Leah asked, nodding toward the offices. "Very much," I replied, trying not to give away that the scale of it all was a bit intimidating. "Here, people are used to working fast," she continued. "No one will hold your hand. But if you prove you can swim, you'll get noticed. And by the way, a tip. If Adam Fraser praises you, it means something. He rarely hands out compliments." We reached a glass door with an engraved plaque, "Adam Fraser, Chief Architect." Leah knocked, and without waiting for a response, she pushed the door open. The office was spacious, with panoramic windows offering a view of the entire city. In the center of the room stood a long, dark wood table, cluttered with blueprints and models. Adam Fraser, a tall man with neatly styled hair and an intense gaze, rose to greet me. His movement was smooth, almost leisurely, as if he knew the whole room already belonged to him. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and a watch on his wrist gleamed, likely worth more than my entire yearly salary. "Sophie, welcome to our team," he said. His voice was deep, with a slight undertone of authority. He extended his hand, and I felt his grip confidently close around mine. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Fraser. This is a great honor." He slightly tilted his head as if acknowledging my formality. "I hope you'll meet our expectations," he said, releasing my hand. "Leah will show you to your workstation, and afterward, if you don't mind, I'd like to discuss your first project." "A project? Already?" I felt the adrenaline rush through my body. "Of course," I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. Leah led me out of the office. A slight smile appeared on her face. "Don't worry," she said. He may seem intimidating, but he's a professional. If you give it your all, he'll notice. My workstation was located in the far corner of the office, by a window with a view of the streets of Boston. The desk was already set up. A laptop, drafting tools, a stack of folders with the company logo. I had barely finished unpacking my things when Leah appeared next to me again. "This is for you," she said, placing a thick folder in front of me. On the cover was a blueprint of an old theater, with a sticky note on top that read, "High priority. The Apollo Theater restoration, one of the firm's largest projects. Adam wants you to do the preliminary sketches for the presentation. Can you handle it?" Leah asked, her tone more of a challenge than support. "Of course," I replied, faster than I had time to think. By the end of the day, Leah approached me again. "Meeting with Adam, you're with us," she said, gesturing for me to follow her. In the conference room, senior staff members were already seated around a long table. I sat near the edge, trying to stay unnoticed. Adam entered a few minutes later, holding my sketches. They were at the top of the stack and I almost held my breath. "Sophie," he said, examining my drawings. "Impressive. It's clear you've put a lot of effort into this." For a moment, I felt a sense of relief, but his next sentence threw me off balance. "However, you have a tendency to rush. Some of the details you added don't align with historical standards. For example, these windows," he pointed to one of the sketches, "are too modern for a building of this period. We need more attention to authenticity." "Understood," I replied briefly, trying to keep my composure. After the meeting, I stayed at my desk, going over the drawings. His comments kept swirling in my mind like sharp thorns. I knew he was right, but the way he conveyed it left an unpleasant aftertaste. Leah approached me with her usual ironic smile. "Well, now you know what it's like to be in Adam's spotlight," she said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "He's always like this, demanding. But that means you've got his attention." I didn't respond. Leah got up, shrugged, and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time that day, I felt doubt creeping in. Would I be able to meet expectations? Or was I just here by chance? The morning of my second day began with the sharp ring of the phone. "Sophie?" Leah's voice was cheerful, but with an undertone of urgency. "Adam wants you to go with him to the site. It's urgent. The car will be here in 20 minutes. "To the site?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness, but I thought, "It's important," she cut me off. "Take everything you might need. Blueprints, notes. Good luck." The call ended, and I stood there with the phone in my hand. Outside, it was still a gray morning, and the city was just starting to wake up. A thought flashed through my mind. Why me? But there was no time to dwell on it. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the car next to Adam. His confidence radiated from everything he did, from the way he gripped the steering wheel to how effortlessly he switched between discussing the project and making calls to contractors. I listened intently, jotting down every detail, but there was a tension in his voice that I couldn't quite place. "This project is a chance to breathe new life into a building that once was the heart of the city," he said, throwing a brief glance at me. "But it will require precision. There's no room for mistakes here." His words felt like a warning, but there was something personal in them as well. It was as though he wasn't only talking about the work. "We need to figure out what can be preserved and what will have to be replaced," Adam explained, gesturing for me to follow him. We spent over an hour inspecting the theater. I sketched, took measurements. In one of the rooms, we were asked to climb onto temporary scaffolding to inspect the ceiling. The scaffolding was shaky, and each step felt like a struggle. I focused on the task, but I could feel one of the planks beneath me creak. My heart skipped a beat. "Be careful!" Adam called out as I stumbled. In the next instant, his hand grabbed my elbow, steadying me from falling. His grip was firm, and his gaze was tense, but there was something in it that I hadn't expected. Warmth, almost inappropriate for the situation. "Are you okay?" he asked, not letting go of me. Yes, thank you," I replied, feeling the heat rise in my face. We stood too close, and the moment lasted longer than it should have. His eyes were dark and focused, but there was something more there than just professional concern. The silence hung in the air, thick and almost tangible. "Be more careful, Sophie," he said finally, releasing me and returning to his work. But that moment stayed with me throughout the rest of the day. Not because of the fear of falling, but because his hand, his gaze, his voice had suddenly changed the way I saw him. In the office, I felt like I was on a carousel ride, where each day brought new challenges. My sketches for the theater had become the topic of discussion at every meeting, and each time I looked at Adam, it seemed like he was searching for something that I couldn't understand. Leah noticed this. "Are you nervous about something, Sophie?" she asked as we crossed paths in the hallway. "You've been disappearing more often during meetings with Adam. Everything okay?" I forced a smile, trying to hide the growing unease. "Yeah, everything's fine, just a lot of work." But her gaze was penetrating, and I realized she knew something, or maybe she was just guessing what was going on in my head. That's how it always was in the office. Everyone notices everything. At home, Michael seemed even more persistent. "You never tell me about your work," he said one evening at dinner. "You keep talking about how much you're doing, but I don't really understand what's going on. What's really happening at that firm?" "Just too much work," I replied, trying to deflect the conversation. "I just need more time to get everything under control." He didn't respond, but I could see his face harden. Dinner continued in silence, and I felt the distance between us growing. Office life wasn't making things easier either. "How's everything with Adam?" Leah asked, somehow emphasizing his name. "I heard he gave you a big task with the theater. Are you managing?" I nodded, but the feeling that everyone around me knew more than I was ready to admit never left. "It's fine," I replied, trying to stay calm. But Leah looked at me again, as if she had caught something, and her gaze was sharp, like a knife. "If you need help, I'm always here," she said. "And honestly, don't worry if some things go beyond work. You're here because you have potential. Just be careful, Sophie. Sometimes work and personal life start to overlap, and it's not always as easy to control as you think." Her words left an unpleasant aftertaste, but I only smiled, accepted the compliment, and tried not to react to her hints. But deep down, I knew that Leah understood something more than I wanted to admit. On Friday evening, I packed my things for the weekend getaway. It was another project weekend with Adam, his partners, and contractors. I knew the trip would involve long hours of discussions, blueprints, and plans. Michael had probably noticed my nervousness as I packed my bag, but he didn't say anything. He silently watched as I packed my suits and documents into my suitcase. "You'll be back on Sunday, right?" His voice was soft, but I could feel something cold in it, as if his displeasure had touched him deeply. I nodded, but I didn't know how to respond to his silence. The drive to the country house was foggy, and the night hid all the contours of the city. I sat in the car, lost in my thoughts. Adam was driving, his gaze focused on the road, as always a little distant. He spoke several times about the project, discussing the details with contractors, but his voice carried an underlying tension. "Are you tired?" he asked suddenly as we drove along the winding road. "We'll be there soon." "No, I'm fine." I relaxed a little, seeing how much he cared about his work. This was perhaps the first time I sensed not just his professionalism, but also his personal strain. After the business dinner, when the last contractor had left, Adam and I remained on the terrace, bathed in the dim light of street lamps that cast soft shadows on the old stone walls. The air held a slight chill, but for me, the silence seemed to overshadow everything else. Suddenly, Adam turned to me, and in his eyes, I saw something different. It wasn't his usual authoritative gaze. It was the look of someone who wanted to share something personal, something that went beyond work. "Have you ever thought that some moments change everything?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Adam spoke again, but this time his words weren't about work. "There are moments in life when everything feels important, when every detail matters, and I think you and we're alike, Sophie. We both strive for something big." I didn't know how to respond, and perhaps that's why I stayed silent. His kiss was unexpected, but so natural, as if this entire moment had been meant only for the two of us. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Something inside me broke. Something strong, something I couldn't control. The kiss wasn't just an impulse. In that moment, I couldn't say what was happening. We spent the entire night together. Returning to Boston turned out to be more stressful than I had anticipated. The thoughts of what had happened at the country house kept swirling in my mind, and every morning when I woke up, it felt like I was living in two worlds at once. One was my work, the theater, the project, my blueprints. The other was Adam, and that kiss I couldn't forget. As soon as I returned to the office, it became clear that I was being perceived differently. Leah, as usual, couldn't help but notice the change in the atmosphere. "How was everything at the country house?" she asked, her gaze sharp, and I knew she could sense something had shifted, even if she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "It was fine," I replied, trying to mask my unease. "We worked a lot." But Leah didn't press further. Instead, her smile became barely noticeable, almost hidden, as if she knew something I hadn't even fully realized yet. "You came back late again," Michael said one evening when I returned from the office. "I don't understand what's going on. You're disappearing more and more. You talk about work, but I can see something else in your eyes. You've stopped sharing with me, and it's not just because of work." "Michael, I didn't know what to say. I tried to explain, but the words didn't sound convincing. He raised his hand, interrupting me. "No need, Sophie," he said, his voice soft but cold. "I don't want to be in the background of your life." And then the rumors began. Leah was the first to hint at what was happening between Adam and me. "I heard how you and Adam exchanged glances at the meeting today," she said one day with a half smile. "I see there's something between you two." I felt a chill run through me. The rumors were spreading faster than I could have imagined. And even if no one spoke openly, I knew they were discussing not just the project, but everything that had happened between us. Leah wasn't stupid. She had noticed that there was something more between Adam and me, and although she tried to hide her curiosity, her words hung in the air like a forewarning that I wouldn't be able to keep my feelings hidden for much longer. At that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same, not at the office, not at home. Everything had changed, and the choice I would have to make became inevitable. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. The questions I had been avoiding began to overwhelm me. What do I really want? If I stay with Michael, I'll lose myself. But if I choose Adam, what will change? Will I be ready to lose everything to be with him? My hands clenched into fists. I couldn't wait any longer. Everything I had built was now hanging by a thread, and there was no time to step back. Michael probably already knew. He had seen my sketches, the correspondence with Adam, even those times when I stayed in the office too late, and his suspicions grew with each passing day. I could feel how his gaze became more watchful, how he distanced himself more and more. And eventually, all of this led to an argument. "Have you ever thought about what's really going on?" he asked that evening, looking me in the eye with such intensity that it almost hurt. "You think I don't notice that you've been avoiding me? That something's changed between you and Adam?" I stayed silent. The answer didn't come. He was right. I had changed, and I couldn't hide it any longer. "I don't know what to do next," I finally said, feeling bitterness overwhelm me. "But I can't keep lying to you, Michael. I can't." Michael looked at me with disappointment, his eyes full of pain. He sighed quietly. "I need time, Sophie," he said, his voice almost detached. "I don't know if I can be with you if you can't be honest." I felt his words pierce through me. It was the end. My feelings for Michael had changed, and I couldn't deny it. But deep down, I knew Adam wasn't just an impulse. It was something more, and I couldn't allow myself to just walk away as if nothing had happened. That same evening, I received a message from Adam. He suggested meeting the next day to discuss the next steps in the project, but I knew it wasn't just about work. He sensed that something was happening between us and was likely waiting for me to make the next move. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. When I arrived at his office the next morning, the atmosphere was tense. He was sitting at the desk, but his gaze wasn't as stern as usual. Like me, he felt that everything had changed. "Sophie, I know we can't continue as we were," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "We both understand that this goes beyond work." I looked at him, and suddenly everything became clear. This was the moment when I couldn't hide it anymore. My heart had chosen him, despite everything.